moving forward, we have a combination of the MMA, that's the macro analytics, covering Stargate finance and the competitor analysis. That's something that myself and Pepe worked on. And bringing that alongside it, we also have the whale wallet findings, the Wednesday's report, where Sloth and I looked at the STG token across the various blockchains. And then on the Thursdays, we have the Token Audit Thursdays, where Trill and Sloth came together to write the report on the Stargate finance bridge and the trilemma around that. So straight over to you guys. How's Stargate finance looking for us?
Yeah, so I think this is a really interesting competitor analysis, and in terms of assessing investments and understanding how projects work in the crypto space in a business sense, this is a great example this week and also next week. Next week we get into Cosmos a bit, and for MMA Monday's research and analysis, we talk about how Cosmos Network is a blue ocean product, which means that they don't really have any competitors. We'll obviously talk about that next week, but one thing that's really important to note is why I brought that up is Synapse, right? Because one thing that Synapse does, one of the two main things that I've found and I'm aware of is that they basically not only do they have their bridge, but they have a cross-chain messaging system, right? And that's kind of like what they harp on quite a bit. And we can see that, this is a good example, in my view, of if you're trying to do too many things in a business, it is a business, right? So a business or you're building a product, you might not be able to compete in the space, right? Because the cross-chain messaging system, in a very basic sense, is quite similar to what Cosmos is doing. And we see that Cosmos, just blows them out of the water in this sense. And then on the bridge side, because Stargate is focused on, well, for one, they're focused on less chains, right? They only have 8 chains, whereas Synapse has, I think right now they have 18. It's either 16 or 18.
Yeah, it's 18 right now.
18, okay. So yeah, they scaled up. I think it used to be 16. But anyway, the point is here that, Synapse is kind of focused on too many things, and whereas Stargate isn't. They're just focused on providing a really good service for 8 chains that have deep liquidity, right? And like I think Obrizi said, that it's you can see the TVL along with, if we look up the price of STG, this is basically the same chart as the coin, So at one point it had over 4 billion in TVL, and right now, excuse me, it's still a respectable amount if we're considering, that it has less chains than Synapse. Where Synapse has TVL of, according to DeFi-Llama, of 189 million, compared to the current roughly 382 million for Stargate. So, logic flow that, okay, because they have access to more chains on Synapse, you'd think that they would have more TVL, they'd have more transactions, things like that. But the reality is, if you do something well and, you're not really trying to scale until you can support 18 chains versus 8, Stargate is the clear winner here. Synapse does have some good elements, but in an anecdotal sense, in my personal experience, I use Stargate, I'll get like a 20-minute estimate for a transfer, ends up being like 3 to 5 minutes sometimes. Stargate, it's taking me over an hour. And that, that obviously depends on the network and things like that, but there's a massive variation in terms of user experience on both platforms. So that's essentially my assessment. And we can get into some questions later, but I'll let Trill and Sloth take it from here.
All right. Yeah, I'll go over some of the analytics on my side. Just go ahead and share my screen real quick. All right, so this is looking at the Nansen dashboard for Stargate. This is particularly the Arbitrum train, just because there's more trades happening, even though there's more liquidity happening on Ethereum. So we see here with Arbitrum, you can see the weekly trades per DEX. It's averaging around 25K at the moment. And then if we look at the Ethereum side, it's a lot less, just due to the nature of cheaper transactions on Arbitrum. But then we see most of the liquidity pools are on Curve Finance. It's kind of interesting because it doesn't actually show the liquidity pools on Stargate itself. So if we actually check the pools on Stargate, then we can see here, here's the top pool. So we can see the USDC pool on Ethereum currently holds 61 million, which is about 16% of the total TVL. And if we look at the token distribution for Stargate, we can see, sorry, the total amount on the DEXs as well as the SEXs is actually dropping, and then we see an increase in the funding token balance, and the funds being basically just different funds as far as like Alameda Research and other ones. So yeah, I'm not sure if the token balance was actually increasing because we actually can see the top balances of Alameda. Some of their wallets were increasing, but then that's because some of the transfers, they were basically just transferring tokens to different wallets. We can see here the balance changes. So here's one for Alameda. So they currently hold 58 million tokens on this one wallet. And we could see here the unique addresses for the token over time, and it's just been on a steady increase. And then if we look over here at Synapse for the token distribution, it's a little bit different because we actually see the amount of tokens for the funds actually going down over time. And we also see an increase in the unique addresses, even though it's kind of hit a bit of a plateau. And then it's also, the numbers are a lot smaller. We're looking at a little over 7K as opposed to Stargate, which is over 30K on the Ethereum chain. And then if we look at some of the other analytics here for Stargate, you can see there's, at least according to this, pretty uneven distribution as far as the amount of wallets holding higher number of tokens. I think that's mostly just due to the community wallets and team wallets and the wallets for the marketing and development holding majority of the tokens. And then similar thing for Synapse too. If we look at the breakdown for the amount of token holdings, it's pretty similar makeup. Even though one thing I noticed, the actual supply held by the top addresses looks like it's actually increasing for Synapse, as opposed to Stargate. We actually see a decrease in the supply held by the top addresses. And then yeah, if there was anything else you want to go over, Trill, as far as the token auditing stuff.
Yeah, for the few things I could go over as far as like the audit side, just for like a quick explanation, Stargate is a byproduct of a company called Layer Zero, which also created a Layer Zero, which is not to be confused with a blockchain, but it's more so just a communication protocol that Stargate runs on. And I'm sharing my screen is showing us two different white papers, because Layer Zero, they have their own white paper for that communication protocol, as well as and then well, Stargate is a byproduct of Layer Zero, so same founders, but they did create another white paper for the Stargate bridge. So quickly about Layer Zero is it's an interoperability protocol supposed to facilitate communication between multiple blockchains. So like I said, even though it says layer zero, it's not to be confused with like layer 1, layer 2 blockchain. It's a communication protocol that would like enable interoperability between those blockchains. How it works quickly is, with Relayer and Oracle. We've quickly talked about oracles before, but oracles in blockchain are used to obtain out of like data or information that's not specifically on that blockchain itself. And this is the function of layer 0. So just a interoperability communication protocol that would allow different various blockchains to communicate with one another. And then we have well, actually, before I go into Stargate, layer 0, before creating Stargate, they wanted to address this issue called the bridging trilemma, which basically states when people are bridging in blockchains. Bridges prior to Stargate, they only had 2 of these 3, and to go over instant guaranteed finality is that your funds are going to be accessible on the source chain when you submit that transaction. And then we have unified liquidity, which is the shared access of pools. Some blockchains have used something called fractured liquidity, which Stargate says basically they use something different called, it's not necessarily fractured liquidity, but it's soft partitioned liquidity. So when people make trades on Stargate and things like that, I should let me go over there. I said trades, but I mean swaps and things like that, because Stargate is supposed to facilitate swaps as well as like actually I'll show this here. Let's say if you wanted to swap USDC on Ethereum for USDT on BNB, Stargate overcame the lock and mint semantics of previous bridges, where you had to use a intermediary token, or kind of like a token that's only serves a purpose on that bridge, and it's just like a synthetic token that would then be used to swap on the destination chain. Stargate, or with layer 0, and with Stargate, they decided they overcame this lack of mint semantics, so that people can also having all these things together, soft partition liquidity. There is liquidity on multiple networks, and it's a little bit if you want to read into the mathematical distribution of that soft partition liquidity, because it's a little bit of math. It's not necessarily crazy difficult, but it has a good amount of variables, because they do support multiple chains and multiple tokens. And so when you have that type of interoperability, it's definitely let's say a extensive algorithm that goes into that. The algorithm name they called is the Delta algorithm. And when you say like soft partition liquidity, this is basically like liquidity available on multiple chains of that native asset that's being swapped. And this also implementation is not without any flaws. They did acknowledge that an issue with this is that the soft partition liquidity, I believe, could be depleted, and so to overcome this, they have something called the equilibrium fee, which is actually a part of the it's a part of the transaction, a part of the bridge right now. But within the white papers, they even said themselves they weren't able to explain that the mathematics of the equilibrium fee in perfect detail. But that is something that's there to help offset the shortcomings that they were able to acknowledge, because nothing is perfect. But as far as also one thing I do want to touch on is that the creator of Sushi. Oh, I'm sorry about that. This website has a paywall, so I had to get rid of it. The creator of Sushi uh, was working with Stargate, and actually Stargate was void on Sushi. So he still retains his role of the founder of Sushi, but he is working with the Stargate finance team as well. So, as far as like Stargate goes, we have the Layer Zero company that created the Layer Zero protocol, and that communication protocol facilitates Stargate, which helps solve the issue of the bridging trilemma, which is known to blockchain. And well, in my opinion, something like this, definitely. Well, I say the technology or the company that can implement this the best would likely be, definitely like a big leader within crypto, because as Ambrosia was just saying, like the interoperability is kind of like the shortcoming of crypto as a whole. And when you have to go from one chain to another, do this and do that, Stargate Layer Zero basically wants to solve that. And the team, the project that can solve that in the best way before, essentially the next one would likely be a major player in the space, because we all know, when you have something on one chain, you want to go to the next chain, and you're going through hurdles, and with Stargate, you're basically overcoming that hurdle.
Awesome. Yeah, I think to your last point there, that's one of the things that Synapse was good for in the last year or so, that everybody was using that to move around finances when the new meme coin was up or something was launched. And it looks like Stargate is, as you say, lined up to be that, especially with the, as pointed out by Sloth and Pepe, that the speed of which they've grown in such a small space of time and with less chains just goes to show that it's going to be a lot better for us. That covers it for us. So thank you, Pepe. Thank you, Sloth, and thank you, Trill. Just looking at, are there any questions for anyone before we continue on that one?
I did have one thing. I was kind of watching in while Sloth was sharing the screens as far as the tokens and kind of going back and forth and comparing them. And it kind of made me think, you guys covered it really, really well. But from, say, a new investor's viewpoint, coming in and taking a look at these two, does it seem like, from all the information you guys have gathered and put together in these reports, does it seem like Stargate is possibly doing it correctly as far as scaling, maybe at a slower pace, versus Synapse, which is really spread themselves out across all these chains? And what does that mean, I guess, from an investor's viewpoint? Like, if somebody was coming in, should they be wary of, supporting Synapse, or would this information kind of lead an investor possibly to go more toward the Stargate side?
From my perspective, I think that Synapse is doing things that other projects already do better, even if Synapse came out before these other protocols, I guess. So they're kind of like, they've spread themselves too thin. And if you just imagine like the current TVL and usability of Stargate versus Synapse, if Stargate wanted to scale, they probably would take some of that market share from Synapse, right? Or other bridges. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't really, I don't see Synapse, like they'll probably survive, but they're not going to be a big player like Stargate or Cosmos, because, in my view, and, the guys that have more of a technical understanding of these things, I think that Stargate has a blue ocean, and then so does Cosmos, which we'll get into next week. So there's already protocols that are already doing what Synapse is trying to gather market share for, if that makes sense.
It does. It kind of goes back to, Ambrosia and I were talking about that a bit on the NFT side, and Trill mentioned, if a player can come in and do this well, then they will have, the foothold. And I think that kind of correlates to a lot of these projects in the space, is how you go step by step to actually fill a need in in the crypto space. This was a really good comparison because, it's good to kind of take a look and see who's doing things well, and who maybe has taken steps in the wrong direction that maybe they might still be relevant, but are they going to actually make it long term, and become big players?
Yeah, and I mean, so to Ambrosia's point earlier, right? Interoperability for crypto and blockchain is huge. That's like the thing that needs to happen in order for the UX to improve. UX in crypto is absolute shit. You know what I mean? Like we've been in it for a while, but like when I have to transfer funds between like one chain to another because this chain the fees are cheaper, you know what I mean? And then I can send it over to this DEX to this SEX, like it's just so many movements and that takes time, you know? If a business or protocol can increase the usability and the speed of transactions and cut out a lot of the nonsense that's going on between the chains, and also like Cosmos does, right? You can build with the best parts of various chains. That's creating that seamless nature is definitely required in the space because it's too confusing right now. And I mean, there's even a learning curve for people that have been in crypto for years, like me. You know what I mean? Like when I encounter a new protocol, I have to go through and do all this research, which is the point of DeFi-Logic, right? We do all the research to figure out exactly, okay, like what's the general point of using Stargate over Synapse? What are the benefits? What are the cons? And then like it from an investment perspective also. So it's a pain to try to learn what I should be using, which one is a better platform to use for my specific purpose. It takes a lot of education and time in the space that people just don't have. It should be much more seamless in my hopefully I'm not being but it's like if crypto can't get to that point, which it can, if it can't, you're gonna have a lot of trouble having people use the various protocols for what they exist for. I mean, a great example from the centralized world is that normies that I know that are not really in the space, but they invest in crypto, they usually leave it on a centralized exchange, and we all know the problem with that. But when you tell them like, oh, all you have to do is just go set up a MetaMask to send your ETH to it, and then it's self-custodied and just hook up a hardware wallet, those are already steps that they don't want to take. Now imagine the headache of beyond that, if you can get past that barrier, all these other like hops between chains, and you know what I mean? Like that's crazy. It's too much. So I mean, Coinbase I think has done a pretty decent job of getting, at least offering an opportunity to users to send their crypto from Coinbase to, they have a Coinbase wallet now that's self-custody. So it's kind of like a middle ground between the two, centralized and decentralized world. But if you're understanding all of these different pain points now, you're going to understand much better what happens in the future. And you're going to be ahead of that power curve of understanding, because if you understand the foundation and how all these things develop, just even in just a basic sense, and you figure that out now, you're going to make a lot more money, and you're going to be able to move much faster in the space than people that are just coming in and they're like, what is a decentralized exchange, or like, what is self-custody, or how do I use a bridge? And then like, even if they fix those problems, why am I moving between chains? Like, why are there so many chains, right? These are just basic questions. But if I guess this is a call out to people that might be interested, but if you understand the technology and how these things work, it definitely translates to making money in the space, 100%. And if you can figure out which projects or protocols are offering genuine value in terms of products that are absolutely necessary, if you get in early enough, and even if you don't even get in early enough, if you get in before everybody else because you understand the scalability of what is to come with that protocol, You're gonna make a lot of money.
Yeah, and I think it was really nice, Sloth bringing up those screens and kind of comparing them really, made my head start kind of turning, going, okay, what am I looking at here? Taking investors through those steps and kind of, because if I would go and try and research it on my own, I wouldn't know what I would be looking at. You know what I mean? So I think it's really important to kind of explain that out like you guys are doing. Then the investor can kind of go, okay, or the user can go, okay, I see, the comparison here. If I do want to get in on this adventure that is crypto, I have a better understanding. So thank you guys so much for this.
Awesome. That was a great explanation from everyone. Thank you, Christine, for the questions. Pepe with the MMA, Sloth with the WWF, and Trill on the Token Audit Thursdays. So that rounds up the Stargate side of things.
Join us next week in Discord for Symposium Sunday at DeFi-Logic.com.